I'm Darren Thomson. I'm the Senior Technical Director responsible for storage and availability management in the EMEA region. I wanted to talk today about having CIO conversations. I'm often asked the question, what do I say to a CIO when I meet one, or indeed a CTO? And actually I've been using pretty much the same pitch for the past sort of 4 or 5 years or so, and it's always worked pretty well for me. So I thought I'd just share this whiteboard pitch with everybody. So first of all, the way I see the role of the CIO working really, I think CIOs and indeed the associated IT organisation are fundamentally responsible for 2 things. First of all, they're responsible for minimising IT risk that is inherent within the IT organisation. And sometimes this is mistaken for the mitigation of all IT risk. The proper behaviour here really is to understand the business's appetite for risk and then to reduce IT risk to the point where the business is satisfied with that. On the other side of the equation though, the IT organisation and the CIO are also responsible for raising operational efficiency, and sometimes this is seen in the form of cost savings, sometimes this is seen in other forms, but you'll all be aware of projects that are very focused on either cost reduction or improvement of efficiency in some way. Now what's interesting about these 2 topics is often they are perceived and they are treated very differently within the client organisation, and as you'll see, I think that's fundamentally wrong. If we connect these 2 things with the analogy of a seesaw, I think this goes some way to understanding how these 2 things should really be approached. On the one hand, as we mentioned, the IT organisation should be lowering IT risk. On the other hand, it should be raising operational efficiency. Now, most of the organisations that I speak to, if you talk about the projects that are going on in the organisation, where the funding is going, you'll very often see these 2 types of areas divided. And so, for example, on the IT risk side of our equation here, you might come across a disaster recovery project, perhaps, or a security project of some kind. These are the sorts of things that you would typically see implemented within an organisation to lower risk. On the other side of this equation, this is where you would see things like data centre consolidation happening, perhaps exploratory exercises into virtualisation. And so these are absolutely focused and targeted on cost reduction and improving efficiency. The mistake that many organisations make though is that they don't recognise the seesaw analogy. If I think about the things that I do in a good IT risk project in order to reduce risk posture and in order to mitigate the necessary risks, they are things like standardisation of infrastructure, standardisation of technology, writing policy down, training people appropriately, etc. Well, that's kind of exactly the same list of things that I would expect to implement on the other side of the seesaw. Symantec have got lots of experiences, lots of best practices and methodologies, and of course products and technologies that can enable people to do these 2 things at the same time. There are disaster recovery projects, for example, that I've been involved in, where not only have we lowered risk as a result of the implementation of disaster recovery, but in doing that in the right way and using good methodology, we've also managed at the same time to increase operational efficiency through standardisation, through consolidation, and through alignment of disaster recovery services to the true business requirement. So customers really, when they're thinking about large IT strategies of this kind, I believe, should be thinking about the seesaw. If they're doing a data centre consolidation project, they should be thinking about ways in which that project can also reduce their IT risks. Conversely, if they're implementing some kind of risk mitigation technique, whether that be disaster recovery or security or any of those types of projects, they should at the same time be thinking about how they can deliver efficiencies back to the organisation as a result of embarking on this project. Now, to finish off with, I normally talk a customer through some definition on either side of the seesaw here, and many of you would have seen some of these definitions perhaps over the past 5 or 6 years within Symantec. On the IT risk side, we really talk to customers about there being 4 quadrants of IT risk. The first quadrant, of course, is security, and Symantec are very well known for their offerings in that area. So security for me has always been largely keeping the bad stuff out of the organisation, viruses, malware, etc., and keeping the good stuff in. We've seen over the past couple of years or so particular interest in the area of data loss prevention, keeping confidential and critical information inside the business and not letting it leak to parties that perhaps shouldn't have it. The second partition here is availability risk. And this really splits two ways as well. This is really about what I call business as usual availability. So within this risk equation, what is the expectation of the user community for IT with regards to availability of applications and systems in normal working environments? It also, of course, encompasses disaster recovery. We've mentioned disaster recovery here already. What happens in the event of a disaster? How does IT survive? How does it recuperate? How does it get itself back online? Also in here would be compliance risk. So does the organisation in question need to comply in some way with either regulatory compliance or some other kind of compliance? And then lastly, we talk about performance risk. Performance risk is not just the obvious, it's not just the performance of applications, performance of the things that the consumers of IT experience. It's also about the performance of the IT organisation itself. There are many industry standards out there, ITIL, COBIT, for example, that talk a lot about how to align an IT organisation's efforts to the business that it serves. So this is how we define IT risk, and so if I was going to go further to define this side of our seesaw here with a CIO or a CTO, this is really Symantec's definition of IT risk. On the other side of the seesaw, the way we think about operational efficiency is around a concept called data center transformation, DCT. Data center transformation really talks to the supply chain that is used to supply IT services to the IT consumer. And this is really made up of three components. First of all, at the bottom here we have facilities. So facilities would be buildings, power, all of the things that surround a data center. In the middle here we have infrastructure. So these are the things that we kind of know and love at Symantec, and largely our product portfolio is there to manage. Storage, servers, networks, and so on. And then lastly, the final part of this equation here is the application estate. So the applications that users, consumers of IT service actually interact with. And when we talk about data center transformation, often that will be in these areas of consolidation, standardization, and virtualization. We think it's very, very important to link these parts of the supply chain. And the reason for that is because often organizations will manage these components of the supply chain quite separately. So very often, for example, you would have a facilities department. They would be responsible for power and cooling and the buildings themselves. They would often be a separate entity, for example, to the people that organise and manage infrastructure. That's ordinarily the operations part of an IT organisation. It's Symantec's belief that unless you start to link these two things together, and then these two things together, and think about the entire supply chain in the context of operational efficiency, it's likely you won't make the efficiency gains that you potentially could if you were thinking in silos. So a good example here would be when we're talking to customers about consolidation, they would often talk to us about virtualization technology. Well, virtualization technology largely sits within this infrastructure area here. If we imagine for a second that a virtualization project enabled us to consolidate our server estate, and that had some kind of effect on power consumption, for example, well, consolidation of the server estate would probably mean reduction in OPEX in the infrastructure area. But the reduction of power consumption would really only be felt by the organisation, and that benefit understood if we involved this part of the organisation in that project. And so this really illustrates the importance of the IT supply chain in the context of operational efficiency. I hope that's been useful. Any questions? We'll be giving details as to how to contact me. Thank you very much.